ever gave us a sign to say you must put this on the window as well, in addition to the signs that are already there.
Okay. I would like to say that we have provided you with multiple signs for that property.
Right.
We've charged you for the rentals of 2 of them. We have given you 3 of them. I do say that we did not go out to the property and verify that you have the appropriate signage. It does state in the ordinance that it's the applicant's responsibility to place the sign and to make sure that it stays up during the entire 15-day notice period.
So I think we're all under the impression that there was a sign there, and we were all under the impression that the signage we had there sufficed. Because I would like to know who you gave those other 3 signs to. I'm sure you have a logbook of who you gave those 3 signs to, because I sure as heck didn't get them. Chris didn't get them. So if you have a logbook, I'd like to see who you gave those 3 signs to. I'm going to bet that everybody thought, from the planning commission to every attorney on this case to every planning board member, thought the other signs that were on the window sufficed, until someone rose an issue about it in the past 48 hours saying, hey, there needs to be another sign sitting side by side to this other sign.
Okay, number one, we do not have a logbook. We generally hand out the signs when the applications come in. In this case, it has gone back and forth a lot of times because the application came in a couple of different stages, and then different people came in, including yourself, at different times to indicate whether you wanted this on the agenda or not. I can go back and see if I can find out and verify for certain on what date and what time these signs were given. However, I don't keep a logbook of that. I do know.
Do I need 2 signs? Do I need 2 signs right now? Is that what I want to understand? Do I need 2 signs? One for the rezoning that's been there for 3 months, and another one talking about CIS and the D4 plan. Do I have to have 2 signs on each building? Am I correct?
The city attorney has advised that the ordinance requires a public notice sign. You have a public notice sign. However, the city's current practice has been over the past year to have the sign that specifically states the type of application. So his recommendation is that you either put another sign that says you're coming for a preliminary site plan approval and CIS, or attach those stickers identifying those applications on the current sign.
How is one supposed to know this when there's already a sign there, and now I have to wait to the city attorney to opine to ask to have that information put on there? How is an applicant supposed to gander at this?
Well, I will say that when you fill out an application, you did fill out the sign, the notice sign part, right, that said that you needed a notice sign. I understand your concern because
I do have a notice sign.
Correct. You do have a notice sign, and then you had 2 separate applications, and it's a complicated issue. I get it, and this hasn't come.
But the city attorney just chimed in today about what kind of notice you want. How is an applicant supposed to know this? Because had I known this, I guarantee you I would have had 10 signs up on that building. I assumed from everything that we've done, there is a sign and there is notice that gives you a QR code that says go to the city website to see what's going on with this building. Just in a day, the city attorney says you should have 2 signs. Nobody ever knew this. Not you, not me, not anybody. Not even my attorneys, not even Chris Long, who's done numerous projects in the city. How is one supposed to know this? That is not fair to me.
So I'll jump in, Mr. Marcus. I understand completely your concern and Mr. Ratner's arguments, and I have learned over the years that it is unwise to argue with Mr. Ratner these matters further. I don't like the idea of postponing at all, given how long we've been through this process together. That's you, the planning board, and the residents who have taken their time to do this. I don't like it at all. However, I am sitting here in a position where the city attorney has provided guidance to us as to what we should do. And that guidance has been verbal today, but I assure you that it will be in written. We'll be requesting it in written form so that it can be inserted in the record and I can get a copy of it. I am in a position, and I believe our board is in a position, where the city attorney has provided his guidance as to the interpretation of proper notice. And I am not of the mindset or at liberty, in my opinion, to challenge that. We're not saying that you're wrong, quite frankly. I'm not saying you and Mr. Ratner are incorrect, as far as I'm concerned. But we do have an opinion from the city attorney that places an onus on us as a board in order to act in a particular manner.
So do I have to have 2 signs up there then?
Yes, what I will do is I will get that written notice to you. I believe the answer is yes. You would need to have 2 signs or notice on the one sign that there are multiple items being considered. But I will make sure that written notice request gets to you, along with perhaps a letter or note from staff to outline specifically what it means.
Thank you.
If that's all right with you, Jana?
Yes, and
Please note that.
as you know, during the pandemic, City Hall is closed, but we have been leaving signs for people to pick up. So I will place another sign, and I will put the site plan review sticker on it and place it with a sticky note with your name on it down by the police department door on Pierce Street, and you can come by and pick it up.
I'm going to need probably 2 signs, 1 for each building, please.
2 more? Okay.
Because I don't want to be back in the situation where someone tells me you didn't put it on the other building.
Understood. Okay, we're going to bring it back to the board as I see no other hands. We have 2 board members with hands up before we vote. Mr. Boyle?
Yes. So, assuming we get through our agenda tonight, which includes the request for rezoning, I would be very concerned that both signs were to remain when this matter comes up, that is the site plan review, in a month's time. Because how is the public to know which item is going to be reviewed? If a decision has been made that they couldn't go to the website, as we heard, then I think we have got to be very careful we don't confuse it again.
Well, and that's a great point, Mr. Boyle, but I will say that there are requirements. We are recommending body on rezoning. They still have to go before City Commission, regardless of what occurs this evening. And they will still need proper notice for the public hearings at the City Commission. So I would not want our board to provide any direction that is counter to the applicant proceeding if they are willing to proceed in the appropriate manner, which they seem to be. So my suggestion might be, while your point is very well taken, that the applicant gets the signs and works directly through his advisors with staff and the city attorney as needed to ensure that nobody is going to that we're not going to solve one problem by creating another.
I think the simple answer here is that whatever sign is posted should be cleared with Mr. Courier.
Any final comments from the board? Mr. Scheer?
The answer to Mr. Boyle's questions in 7.02B4A5, which says it's the obligation of the applicant to remove the sign about the rezoning the day after the public hearing. In maybe perhaps explanation, I haven't seen the city attorney's written opinion if he has one, but there are 2 separate sign references, one in 7.02 that relates to rezoning, one in 7.29 that relates to site plan review. I suppose if we at some point might want to consider changes to the ordinance to clarify that language, because 7.29 could be clearer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Final comment, Mr. Jeffries, and then we need to move along.
Yeah, this is really frustrating because I don't like our signs. I've sent several examples to the city manager because the QR code works if you happen to be within 2.5 feet of the sign. Otherwise, to Mr. Ratner's point, you have to go onto the city site. You know something's going to happen, and then you see everything that's coming up. You go to the agenda. I would love to see if we could put it on our little list of priorities that we have a sign. Savannah, Georgia, for example, has this. This is a crazy idea. They put a sign up saying, something's going to happen on this property. And then there's 2 great big lines where they take huge black marker and write down exactly what it is, if they're replacing the windows, if it's a demolition or whatever. And there's none of this having to chase it through a site and all. I just figure we can make this so much easier for the public to know what's going on with buildings instead of becoming Nancy Drew and chasing this stuff down the website. So
With that, we have a motion and a second. Let's proceed with the roll call.
Brian Williams,
Yes.
Daniel Scher,
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce,
Yes.
Robin Boyle,
Yes.
Scott Klein,
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries,
no.
Bert Kosek.
No.
Okay.
Motion does
So
carry.
I have one question.
Yes, sir, Mr. Marcus.
Mr. Scher said that the sign needs to come down because he was referencing an ordinance after the public hearing. Which public hearing? Tonight's public hearing or the full city commission's public hearing?
I think it would be in everyone's best interest for you and staff, and whether that's Mr. Ratner or Mr. Courier, to work through that offline as opposed to us trying to leaf through an agenda tonight and tell you, I want to make sure you get the proper direction because I don't want to have this repeated in the future. So I ask for you to work directly with staff to get that answer. I ask staff to immediately get confirmation from Mr. Courier for them in writing so that they can understand their requirements and not waste any time in being able to fulfill them. Mr. Williams.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that in accordance with the recommendations of the city attorney, the planning board moves to postpone the preliminary site plan review for 469 to 479 south of Woodward to June 24, 2020 to ensure that the applicant has an opportunity to post appropriate notice on the site for at least 15 days in accordance with city ordinances and current city practice.
We have a motion by Mr. Williams. Do we have a second?
Support.
Second by Mr. Scher. Any additional conversation by the board? We just went through this. To the public, for the record, Mr. Ratner, I would assume you would like your same objections to apply to this matter, Mr. Ratner. You're on mute, Mr. Ratner. Hold on one second.
Is that better?
There you go, sir.
Thank you. You have my objections that are on the record now. I want to make two additional comments if I can. Mr. Chair has mentioned the two areas of notice. I would like to put on the record that if you're going to be looking at that ordinance, you should look at 729. And if you're going to have it for anything other than a final site plan, it should be stated as such. So that would alleviate some confusion and avoid this kind of thing. And also, I would like to ask that if we're going to be postponed on this, then we go to the date that you mentioned, which is the second meeting in June. Since we've been postponed, I'd like to see if we could get on as soon as possible. So adjourn to a specific date.
Very good.
Yeah, it is called for the 24th, the same meeting, the 24th, the very next meeting that you would be eligible by notice. That was in.
And we will be put on that agenda?
That was in the motion, yes. The postponement to a date.
Right. I'm sorry, it's that. Great.
Oh, no problem. Any other comments from the public? I see no other hands. We'll bring it back to the board. Roll call, please.
Brian Williams,
Yes.
Daniel Scher,
Yes.
Janelle Whipple-Boyce,
Yes.
Robin Boyle,
Yes.
Scott Klein,
Yes.
Stuart Jeffries,
No.
Bert Kosek. Sorry, was that a no?
Yes.
Okay.
Motion does carry. Thank you very much. With that, we are moving on to our actual agenda. We have a rezoning request, E1, 469 to 479 South Old Woodward, the former Mountain King and Talmer Bank sites. Jana, would you please start with this? I will officially open the public hearing into that matter. And Jana, if you would please start your report.
Yes, I will go through this. As you know, we've seen this many times over the last couple of years. I will not go through every date and every history and every meeting that we've gone through on this before. What I'll do is summarize it to say that the applicant applied for this rezone. They went to the planning board. They ultimately went on to the city commission. The city commission did not reach consensus on what they wished to do with the rezoning application. That was in March of 2019. At that time, they discussed some of their concerns with regards to the way the ordinance was written for D5. And the applicant then came back in June of 2019 and submitted a petition to you to amend that ordinance language to deal with some of the inconsistencies or clarifications that were needed raised by the city commission at the rezoning hearing. So the applicant did submit an application to amend the zoning ordinance with regard to D5 to do three things. One, to clarify how a building height was calculated. Two, to clarify the meaning of immediately adjacent or abutting. And three, to determine which properties to consider, if any, for rezoning to D5. So as the planning board knows, we did go through this and we had several meetings last summer, starting in June and going on in July. The planning board determined that the building height is very clearly set out of how to determine it in the zoning ordinance, and that was not needed. You did look at some language with regards to the D5 and properties that were immediately adjacent or abutting. There was a lot of discussion on that, and it was decided that we should strike adjacent and go with abutting, and I'll get into that in a minute. And also make sure we address how properties that abut streets and alleys are affected. We also looked at which properties to consider, if any, for D5 or rezoning to D5. As you recall, the motion of the board was to call on DPZ, Dwani Plater Zyberg, who is currently working on our master plan for 2040, to look at this block area, this area where this property is located within. So that's from Brown to Old Woodward to Big Woodward, down to where the two Woodwards join together at the south end, and make a determination for us based on their planning opinions, which of those properties, if any, should potentially qualify for rezoning to D5. We did receive that report back. The planning board talked about it. We asked for additional what happened, the report by DPZ did state that essentially all of the properties within that area that I described should be considered for rezoning to D5, with the possible exception of the site of the Peabody Mansion due to historical preservation purposes. The board did accept that study. We also did suggest changes to the city commission with regards to the ordinance language for D5. And ultimately the language was changed to read essentially in D5, as you know, when the D5 zone district was created a couple of years ago and the three parcels were rezoned to D5, it stated that you could have a new building or an addition to an existing building in the D5 zone, and it must meet the requirements of the Birmingham Overlay District and the D4 zone, except that the height of any addition and new construction in the D5 zone may be over the maximum building height in D4. And then what we changed was, but not exceed the height of an existing building on a directly abutting D5 zone property. So it used to read immediately adjacent or abutting. There was some concern that that was not clear. We did change it to the maximum building height may be increased, but not exceed the height of an existing building directly abutting a D5 zone property. Abutting was then also added to the definition section of the ordinance and defined abutting, sharing a property or boundary line. We also changed the language with regards to D5 that states, for the purposes of the D5 section, private properties separated by public property, including the public right-of-way and public vias, will not be deemed abutting. So essentially clarified all of those issues with regards to which properties are deemed immediately adjacent or abutting. It is only those properties that share a boundary or property line and are not separated by a street, alley, etc. that's publicly owned. So that did go to the City Commission. As you know, the City Commission earlier this year in January did adopt that ordinance amendment to clarify those issues within the ordinance. Accordingly, the applicant is now back after having had those issues that caused some discussion at the City Commission level and consensus was not reached. Now that some of those have been hopefully sorted out, they are back with their rezoning application that they previously made to go from the property now, which is zone B3 and D4, to B3 and D5. As you know, we have gone over this extensively in the past, but essentially the applicant has to show in their application, they have to prove three things. They have to provide necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of the right usage commonly associated with property ownership. They have to provide an explanation of why the existing zoning classification is no longer appropriate. And they have to provide an explanation of why the proposed rezoning will not be detrimental to the surrounding properties. The applicant has provided a lot of information. You could see in the packet, I have included all of the information from their original rezoning request, the request when it went to the City Commission, the D5 reports, and anything that's been submitted thereafter. I will leave that to the applicant to go through how they have shown all of those things, but for the purposes of the application, they have provided their explanations to those 3 points that require them to have a valid application. In addition, they're required to submit a land survey. They did submit a land survey. If anybody wants me to put it up on the screen, please let me know. It literally just shows where that parcel is. Just to be clear, the parcel is on the north side of Haynes Street, sandwiched between Big Woodward and Old Woodward. To the north of it is the condominiums at Birmingham Place, which has the first floor retail, and the residential units above. To the south, across the street, across Haynes, is the 555 building, and they also have a mix of uses. The northern portion of the 555 building is commercial, and the southern portion is a mix of retail, commercial, and residential. With regards to what the ordinance says, the planning board is required to hold at least one public hearing, which this is going to be the latest public hearing on this topic. And the planning board is required by our zoning ordinance to make findings based on the evidence presented to it with respect to the following 5 items. 1, you have to look at the objectives of the city's then current master plan and the city's 2016 plan. 2, you have to look at the existing uses of property within the general area of the property in question. 3, you have to look at the zoning classification of property within the general area of the property in question. 4, you have to look at the suitability of the property in question to the uses permitted under the existing zoning classification. And lastly, you have to look at the trend of development in the general area of the property in question, including any changes which may have taken place in that area with regards to the zoning classifications. So I will go through the planning division's analysis and findings with respect to those 5 items. Those are the 5 items that the planning board has to make a decision based on whether or not they wish to recommend a rezoning. Just for the public, I will reiterate that this is a recommendation of the planning board as to whether or not the rezoning should be considered from D4 to D5. The final decision will not be arrived at tonight. The planning board will. Under the zoning ordinance, the City Commission has the sole power to give the final word on whether or not the rezoning should be approved or not. So they do consider the recommendation of the planning board, but they will hold another public hearing at the City Commission level and make the decision at that point. So to go through the first area that you're required to make findings of the evidence, to look at the objectives of the city's then current master plan and the city's 2016 plan. Essentially, the zoning ordinance brings in the master plan and states that the purpose of the zoning ordinance is to guide the growth and development of the city in accordance with the goals, objectives, and strategies stated within the future land use plan, which is in the city's now current master plan. And it has to be, it is to guide the growth and development in accordance with the strategy stated in the 2016 plan. So a review of both plans shows that the potential rezoning to D5 could be construed as meeting the spirit and intent of the ordinance. Specifically, the 2016 plan states that specific building heights and massing should be determined that appropriately define the public street and are harmonious with existing buildings in the area. So to that point alone, right there, the application to rezone to D5 could allow a height with a special land use permit, of course, up to but not exceeding the height of existing buildings that are abutting the property. The only one abutting that is not separated by a street is the Birmingham Place, and therefore, if the applicant were to be approved for the rezoning for D5, they could go up to but not exceed the height of Birmingham Place to the north. Now, with regards to the 2016 plan, it recommends specific building heights and massing that define the public street and are harmonious with existing buildings. So obviously an equal height of the building to the north would be harmonious with what's already there. Also, the 2016 plan requires first floor retail along Old Woodward and encourages a mix of uses along that corridor. That could happen either way with the D4 or the D5, as both of those zone districts do allow and encourage mixed uses with first floor retail. A proposed building under D5 would allow for the mixed uses, as I mentioned, but it would allow for a scale and massing that would be more compatible with the existing abutting buildings. Also, the 2016 plan recommends that the city should encourage future buildings to front onto Woodward and to provide a good face forward to Woodward, and to hold that facade up to the same level of detail and architecture that we. That's something to be considered as we go through a future site plan review, but I think it's important to note that they would be required to have a very good facade on the Woodward Act side of the building as well. The second thing you need to look at is the existing uses of property within the general area of the property in question. As you can see in the chart, or in the report, there is a chart that deals with all of the uses that are available or currently in place now to the north, south, east, and west of the subject property. And as I mentioned, both the Birmingham Place and the 555 buildings to the north and south both contain a mix of retail, commercial, and residential uses. Across Woodward to the east, there's the Audi dealership, which is retail/commercial and has parking facilitated with it. And to the west is a commercial center with both retail and commercial uses, including a drugstore, dry cleaners, and a clothing store. So it's very clear that there is a mix of uses in this area. And whether it's the D5 zone does not change the permitted uses from the D4. So whether it's D4 or D5, it would be the same uses, and therefore either one would have uses that are compatible with what's there and consistent with what's already there in the area, and it would be the same uses either way. With regards to the third point, the zoning classification of property within the general area of the property in question. The properties to the north and south, as I previously mentioned, are both zone B3, the same as this site is in the underlying zoning. With regards to the overlay zoning, the property to the north is zone D5. Property to the south is zone D5. The property that we're talking about is zone D4 in the overlay. With regards to the east and west side, on the east side of Woodward Avenue, the property is actually in the Triangle District, and so it's zoned MU5. It has a different list of zoning classifications over there, and that MU5 district does permit up to 6 stories in height. The property to the west across South Old Woodward is zone B2B and D2, which would allow up to 3 stories. Next thing you need to look at is the suitability of the property in question to the uses permitted under the existing zoning classification. As I mentioned, under the existing zoning classification, retail, commercial, and residential uses are all permitted, and certainly any of those uses would be consistent with what is around there. That is also the case with regards to the D5 uses, because they are all the same uses that are permitted and would also be compatible with what's with regard to uses. The last thing, the trend of development in the general area of the property in question, including any changes which have taken place in the zoning classification. You're required to look at that. And as you know, we did several years ago create this new D5 zoning district for the overlay. And we did rezone 3 properties into that D5 zone. And that was Birmingham Place, the 555 building, and the Merrillwood building on Merrill towards Old Woodward. And so that is the only rezoning or the zoning changes that have occurred in this area. And those were to move from D4 to D5. There have been no new buildings considered before this particular building for D5, for new construction under D5. So essentially, the proposal to rezone to D5 is appropriate and compatible with both the zoning and the height of the properties within the general area, because there are D5s to the north, D5s to the south, and there's substantial height to the north and south. And any building that would be built here under a D5 would be most consistent as the 2016 plan requires if it's built of similar height and similar massing. In addition, a rezoning to D5 is consistent with the recent zoning changes from D4 to D5 within that area. And it's also consistent with the recommendations of the report done by DPZ last year in 2019 that studied all of the area, the block in general that we're discussing, and even a little bit further out. And if you recall, there was massing studies at that time. So with that, I will leave it to the board to discuss. I don't know if you want to go to the applicant first to go through what their requirements are to show in the application with regards to their reasons why they're requesting the rezoning.
So board, if it's all right, I would like to go directly to the applicant unless there are questions. I mean, we have been through this a number of times. I think it's more appropriate to allow the applicant time to properly present their case for the record. So seeing no one shaking their hands at me, I will say to, it looks like Mr. Ratner, if you would like to take the floor, please.
Yes, I'd like to go at this a little differently because of the length of time that we've all been studying this. It started 2 years ago. And the bottom line here is that this study of a D5 has been patiently and thoroughly reviewed by independent consultants, including the planning department. And you have heard more than once about this project. It's contested because there are many people next to it who live in Birmingham Place that are against it. And so therefore there is opposition. However, in the past 2 years, when we look at every one of the ordinance requirements that apply to the D5 and to a rezoning, there's not one of them that comes up short on our side. We have fulfilled, and that property is in the perfect position for a D5 building. It will be an asset to the city for many reasons, but it will comply with the master plan. Now, Jana has gone over that in detail, and the master plan was even reinforced by a study area done by GPC, and they concluded, as Jana said, that this area is properly on tap for a D5 zoning. The applicant has withstood many assaults in the hearings that have run from everything from comments that this was only meant for 3 buildings and we weren't allowed to come in for rezoning generally of another property. This, of course, was dispelled by the city attorney. And the objections also centered around the idea that this property was not consistent with what was being developed in that area. Well, I beg to differ. You have to just open your eyes, look at the streetscape, look at what we have planned for that area, and see that the 2 buildings that are there are not consistent with the master plan or the zoning requirements. We didn't say that this zoning was impossible, we said it was not appropriate. That takes into consideration all modern views of planning for the city, including the most recent update. What would happen with this particular piece of property, if it was rezoned, and this board recommended a rezoning to the city commission, is that we would have a consistent, walkable community in that area of town, an area that was set apart in the master plan to need this kind of work. We have to have people in the south area to go along with the good restaurants, 555, Birmingham Place, and across the street. And this area right now is dead. But it wouldn't be if we offered it the opportunity to be redeveloped. Now, I have a PowerPoint. Janet, I don't know if you're going to be able to pull it up. Can you do that? Janet?
He's working
Sorry,
on that
I was
right now.
muted. Yes, I can pull it up if you would like it on the screen.
Yeah.
You'll have to
And
let
then
me
I'll tell
know
you.
when you want the pages to be changed,
will.
okay?
We'll go through it quickly because it is a summary of what you went through, but I want to go through it because this board has done so much in the study of this process. Wait a second. There we go. All right.
Can everybody
next slide.
see Can everybody see the
Yep.
slide? Okay.
Absolutely.
Next slide, please.
Yes.
That's an aerial view to show dramatically what we're talking about. We have 555 to the bottom right-hand side. We have the Birmingham Place to the north, and we have this smaller building that is inconsistent with both of them and the streetscape in that area of town. Next slide, please. This is a summary. We've been doing this for 2 years with all of the discussions. It was advertised and noticed, and there were several different options. But the multiple iteration of draft amendments that went to the commission, came back to the board, and then was studied and went back to the commission, was finally approved. So we now have a T5 ordinance that has integrity and has been thoroughly vetted by the two commissions, by the planning board and the city commission, in their study over 2 years. Next slide, please. The first thing we looked at was its fitting in to the vision statement of the master plan. It reinforces the identifiable downtown district. These are all from the vision statement in the 216 plan, parts of it. The diverse mix of uses, including street level retail, commercial, and especially residential, are enhanced by the advent of a T5 zone. And it will allow building compatible in mass and scale with the immediate surroundings. These are all things that were mentioned, but they have to be part of our showing to you that what you have listened to over the last 2 years perfectly fits in to our zoning ordinance. Next slide, please. The overlay district has been developed to add additional and unique development standards, which would better help the city and accomplish the goals of the downtown development plan 16. This has been in operation for quite a while, and I think it's showing tremendous success because our community, as it grows, has remained walkable and has remained a pleasant place to be. Next slide, please. The specifics of this are set forth in the three elements of 702BB, 2B1, Romanet 1 through Romanet 3. And in summary, we satisfy 104, which we have a slide on. And the rezoning preserves the enjoyment of rights and uses associated with ownership. After all, every other owner in that area has been able to do what we're asking to do. And that's important because why should we not be able to do what everybody from 555 to Birmingham Place has been able to do? The existing program zoning is simply not appropriate. It's anachronistic, and it is a development from a prior time when we hadn't fully developed our plan. We're now much more mature than that. It's not detrimental to the surrounding properties. It's the same size. Its massing fits within the same size. I know the argument of certain Birmingham Place residents is it's blocking the view. I can understand that, but it is by D4 or D5 a lot line to lot line development, and it's something that can be done. So we should do it with the best intentions as we could. Is somebody calling me? Oh, okay.
No.
And
No, please proceed.
thank you. I thought I heard my name. And it satisfies the zoning ordinance again, and the purpose of the zoning ordinance. Now, next slide, please. The demonstration of the needs in 702B5A through E have been gone over by Jana. And it's just a repeat to hammer home that we fit right within the master plan. We are proposing a mix of uses. That's what we would be consistent with. D4 is consistent with that, and D5 is consistent. So we're not proposing a different type of use. The properties in the general areas are compatible with D5 uses. The properties not suitable to fit into that area because of the constraints of the property. It's a small piece of property and can be developed with much more integrity and ingenuity so that all the neighbors can benefit and the city can benefit from the assets that can be devised from a D5 building subject to a special land use, and it fits right into the trend of development. Next slide. After consideration, the amendment to the ordinances have already been approved by the city. So as I say, we've vetted this pretty well over this year. Next slide. Again, picture to show the difference that we would like to bring into a modern view, especially after DPZ has given us another professional opinion that this area, this particular property, is perfectly suited for the D5. Next slide, please. Massing of this area shows what could be. Now, we haven't designed it yet, but could happen with a D5 building, which offers us the flexibility. And flexibility is the key word for the overlay area. We want to be able to use this property in a way that makes everybody proud. And we're not hemmed in by building a building that doesn't have architectural integrity, which is allowed to us if we can go to the D5 height. Next slide, please. This is a different view showing that even with a D5 building, as it steps back, there is air and light between the buildings. Birmingham Place was in fact designed so that the part that is part of the part that is next to this building would be a step back, and the part that is abutting this building is a wall, as shown, not up against any windows. I don't know how much more we can say about the suitability of this particular property for a D5 zone, except it's right, it's proper, it's fair, it fits all of our requirements. It's been vetted for 2 years, and it's a step forward, not backwards, so that the city can enjoy architecture that continues to comply with the master plan and meet the zoning ordinances that we jealously guard. So I ask that you recommend this to the city commission, that we can get a favorable recommendation that this property, this small property, should be zone D5. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ratner. I appreciate your input as always. Before we go to the public, would the board have any questions for Mr. Ratner or the applicant at this time? Mr. Kozak, you have your hands up.
Mr. Ratner, can you just go back to those 3D images? I was confused by those images.
The massing images?
Yeah.
It's the last slides, Jenna. Go back 2 or 3. Start, not there. There. That's good.
So under D5,
Well,
and I know we're not designing a building or rezoning a property is not tied to a specific design, but you're showing these setbacks and the building from those diagrams didn't show that it was even as tall as Birmingham Place. So what am I looking at here?
it might be a trick. Chris is on the line, Chris Long, but it is about as tall. But importantly, Mr. Kozak, if I can go back a slide, 2 slides, Janet, one more. One more, back. Thank you. That's the wall that I'm talking about. Anything that's is taller there in that wall doesn't abut any windows. Now you go forward.
Under D5, you would be allowed, I know it's a slop situation, but you'd be allowed to, I don't know the height of Birmingham Place. You know, is it 130 feet or whatever?
Right,
you know,
we're allowed to go that high.
You'd be okay. So those diagrams you were showing did not look like it was extending up to that height. So,
can I interject?
Yeah, Mr. Marcus, I see your hand is up. If you'd like to jump in, please.
Yes. So what we purposely did is to, we were designing this in mind with what the neighbors have next door and building a harmonious type of development. So we thought we would take it high up on the old Woodward side and abut the brick portion that has no windows or no obstruction of views for any residents. And as we come towards Big Woodward, we start cascading the floors down to give more light and day and air to the other tenants that face south from Birmingham Place. As opposed to doing a D4, putting one block going lot line to lot line, I would not have the luxury of stepping back and coming back. So we thought it'd be prudent to say, let me build a 9-story building that has 9 stories on